If I know anything about writing, I have Mrs. Phipps to thank for it. Mrs. Phipps was my English teacher in 7th grade and then again in 9th grade. My junior high brain remembers her as tall, middle-aged, always professionally dressed, with extremely black hair, perhaps blacker than one could expect in the natural world. She was stern, strict, and demanding. But if I know anything about writing, I have Mrs. Phipps to thank for it. It was Mrs. Phipps who taught me about something called a theme statement, a sentence or two that summarizes the main idea of a work of literature, even though in my junior high days, I'm sure I never wrote anything that could be even remotely called a work of literature. One of my favorite theme statements is the first line of one of my favorite works of literature. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Many of you probably recognize that as the first line of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Now, even if you've never read that book, that sentence will give you a pretty good idea of what the book is all about, because it is a great theme statement. Marcus Borg, the New Testament scholar and theologian, wrote that our gospel reading today from the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of John is the thematic introduction, the extended theme statement, if you will, to the entire Gospel of John. He wrote that this story, set in a wedding feast in the village of Cana, gives us a lens through which we can see an advanced glimpse of the gospel writer's perception of Jesus and his significance. In this story, Jesus, his mother Mary, and his disciples were at a wedding feast when the wine runs out. A really embarrassing situation for the host. And the text reports what has been called Jesus' first miracle, the transformation of a large quantity of water into really excellent wine. It is indeed a miracle, an event that frankly violates all our expectations and even our sensibilities as enlightened inhabitants of 21st century America. But the reality is that the gospel writer did not call what happened at that wedding in Cana of Galilee a miracle. No, in the text, it is called a sign. Signs point to something beyond themselves. And in a play on words, Borg said they signify or signify something. What they signify or signify is their significance. Now, if we focus too much on the details of this story, and it is very detailed, the details of this miracle, if you will, then I am afraid we might miss the bigger point. We may miss the sign, the showing of something very important about the true identity of this one who was born in a manger. Sort of like seeing the trees but missing the forest. Trying to figure out all the details of the story but missing its meaning. So how can we avoid the trap of focusing on the story's details and miss its significance? Well, I think there are two kinds of details here that I think could distract us. The first, there are the details of just what did happen at that wedding. Did water actually get transformed into wine that day? And if it did, just how did Jesus do that? I don't know about you, but my 21st century brain makes it hard for me to believe this sort of miracle. It can sound a little like hocus pocus, just too much to believe. And even if I do believe that this miraculous transformation occurred, well, I have absolutely no way of explaining it. But the very essence of miracles is that they shatter our rational explanations. They shatter our conventional expectations, and this miracle is no exception. You either believe the miracle happened or you don't, but I'm guessing you cannot explain it. We could ponder and argue and debate the details of it and how it really happened, but I don't think that gets us very far in finding the story's larger meaning or significance. Remember what I said about seeing the trees but missing the forest, figuring out the details but missing the point. And there's a whole other set of story details. A number of these details have caught the attention of biblical scholars for over 2,000 years now. The odd verbal exchange between Jesus and his mother, the detail about the great quantity of water in the stone jars and that it was for the Jewish rites of purification, the anticipation of Jesus' hour. These details are important. I'm not saying that they are not. Much has been written and said about each of them. They've been pondered and argued and debated. But I, along with Marcus Borg and others, do not think that they tell us about the real significance of the sign here. These details don't get us to the real meaning either. Probably more trees than forest here too. So what is the meaning of this story as a sign? What is its significance? Well, I, along with others, think that the primary symbolic feature of this text is its setting. This sign occurred at a wedding banquet. In first century Palestine, wedding banquets were the most festive occasions there were. This was especially the case for those who were peasants, and Cana was a peasant village. Wedding banquets typically lasted for several days, maybe even a week. There was food, lots of rich food, food that peasants didn't usually get to eat any other time. And there was wine and dancing and everything that would make for a really great party. An all-out party that lasted an entire week. A party where everyone in town came to celebrate the new life of a marriage in their community. So what is the significance? What does this story tell us about Jesus' identity, who he was, and what the good news he brought was all about? Well, here is what I believe John's answer to this question is. The story of Jesus, the good news of Jesus, is about a wedding banquet, a big community party, bringing everyone together in fellowship, a banquet at which the wine never runs out and the best is saved for last. Hadn't the prophet Isaiah written of the Messiah, "On this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wines, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wine strained clear." So who is Jesus? The wise men in Matthew's gospel told us that Jesus is the new king, the one who will supplant all other kings. Even Herod seemed to know this new king was a threat, since he wanted the wise men to tell him where Jesus was so that he could do away with him right then and there. The heavenly voice that we hear in the Gospels tells us at Jesus' baptism, tell us that Jesus is the beloved, the Son of the Father. And this first sign of Jesus, this inauguration of his public ministry, as related in John's Gospel, I believe, tells us that Jesus is the one who brings us joy and gladness and community and fellowship. And Jesus brings it in abundance that we cannot even imagine. Grace upon grace, gift after gift after gift. I believe that the surest indication that Jesus is present in a church may be the presence of laughter and smiles, hugs and handshakes, a strong sense of community, people who actually enjoy each other's company and are having fun. No doubt, if Jesus' presence is real in the church, there will be other indications as well. But without that first indication, the joy and the community and the fellowship, frankly, I would be surprised to find any of the others. God does not want our religion to be too holy to be happy in. At a wedding in Cana of Galilee, Jesus turned water into wine to point us to the glory of his Father, a God who I believe absolutely loves to hear the laughter of God's people and who desires God's children to live their life together in a spirit of celebration and abundance. In her book, Searching for Sunday, beloved Rachel Held Evans wrote this: "The church is God saying, I'm throwing a banquet, and all these mismatched, messed up people are invited. Here, have some wine. I'm throwing a banquet, and all these mismatched, messed up people are invited. Here, have some wine." So come, my friends, join us at the party where the wine never runs out and the best is saved for last. Amen.